My name is Cyril Reyes, and oh, there we go. Hello, my name is Cyril Reyes, and I'm here to talk about translanguaging. Before I start today, just a little bit about myself. My name is Cyril Reyes, once again, and I am a professor at Woosong University, and I've been teaching English in South Korea for about a decade. Today's topic, the reason I'm talking about it is I think it's important. It is a term, a concept that people mention and people use, uh, at least in a lot of applied linguistic papers, in certain second language acquisition papers, and what needs, what I think is needed is conceptual clarification. What does translanguaging mean? So today I would like to provide uh, a definition, well, more than one definition of translanguaging, and hopefully it's useful both theoretically and practically. So, okay. Um, Before I continue, I would like to offer one caveat. Um, I think today's talk might be jarring, even though I am offering conceptual clarification. And it might be jarring because we'll begin at a very familiar place. We'll talk about classrooms, we'll talk about teaching, uh, and we'll talk a little bit about social and political topics, but we will conclude at a very different place. And in that place, the classroom doesn't even exist, and students and teachers are no longer individuals. And we get there because there is something about freedom and liberation that is included in the terminology of, or at least in the concept of translanguaging. And I would like to mention this as we go on, that maybe at the end you might feel uncomfortable as to how this talk will end. And so I'll prepare you and say that we will begin at a very familiar place, but we might conclude at a very different place where we don't really know what's going on. At least from a level of, we know we're no longer in the classroom, and we are no longer so sure of the categories that we need in order to understand ourselves as individuals. So please bear that in mind. Now, why translanguaging? We have translanguaging because there is a history of monolingual instruction, at least in language learning. And that monolingual instruction did not make room for the student's mother tongue. And it was an exclusive classroom. And in reaction to that, there were social justice movements in both education and in language instruction that embraced the diversity in classrooms around the world, and translanguaging emerged. And that's a very simple story of why translanguaging emerged. It came out of a tyrannical history of monolingual instruction. It might seem a little bit exaggerated, but originally the term, I can't pronounce, I don't know how to speak Welsh, but the term originated as a form of pedagogical practice. It was a form of bilingual instruction in a time when it was frowned upon. And the instructor decided to allow for code switching, to use one mode of language for input and output so that the students are able to better understand the target language. So they would use Welsh as as a form of scaffolding in order for them to better use the target language, which is English. So that's the origin of translanguaging. It's to really the negotiation of two languages in the classroom. In a time when the use of the mother tongue, at least in Wales, was frowned upon. So we kind of, at the very outset, we can think of translanguaging as code switching, when we go from one language to the other. So I have a picture on the screen. In a lot of cases, code switching is very natural, especially for second language learners or even for foreign language learners. It is a way for them to better understand, especially grammatical issues or grammatical lessons. In terms of conversation, it is very difficult for someone who is not competent enough in terms of the target language. They might revert back to using their mother tongue, and they would expect someone to understand. And at least at the very beginning of translanguaging, code switching is, well, it was accepted, it was embraced. So I think this is probably the most common form of the most common definition. Okay, and it's the one used by people at least in passing, when they're not necessarily using the term translanguaging, but mentioning it. Okay, and I mean, that's fairly clear. But for traditional language instructors, at least if you happen to, let's say, if you are a dogmatic, communicative approach instructor, well, code switching is not really maximizing it's not maximizing the potential of the student. The student is supposed to maximize every opportunity to use the target language. And code switching encourages interference. Well, they're not really using the target language if a student is constantly code switching. So this will move on to the second definition. So the first definition is translanguaging as code switching. The second one the second one provides at least the theoretical support as to why code switching is okay. Excuse me. And so it's the contextual support as to why people should code switch. So and it provides support to the first definition, and that's the Bootcamp definition. So Wolfgang Bootcamp wrote an article, We Only Learn Language Once. And he provides at least the dogmatic reasons, but the reasons why we should embrace the mother tongue in the classroom. And it's cognitively speaking, or at least the cognitive evidence is that we need the mother tongue because it is the acquired prior knowledge of our students. And if we don't use it, we are debilitating our students from actually using what they know. So this is, again, it's a way, if we were only to approach it from a strictly monolingual perspective, or if our approach is purely monolingual, we are actually not helping our students. We are leaving them in the dark, okay? Because without the mother tongue, it would be blank incomprehension. And successful learners capitalize on the vast amount of linguistic skills and world knowledge they have accumulated via the mother tongue. So there is really no point in trying to suppress the mother tongue. It's actually bad teaching. So like what we see as code switching is actually not an issue. It's a way of activating our students' repertoires in the classroom. So that's the mother tongue definition. So I call it, we only learn language once. And that's, again, the mother tongue translanguaging definition. So if you like to think of it, first one is code switching, is translanguaging is code switching. And again, that's probably the most common way people understand translanguaging. It's code switching. I am going back and forth from my L1 to the language of the classroom, or the language of the language of my current environment. The second definition is why is it the best way for me to learn? If I am code switching, it provides that contextual support that this is what we know. And if I don't activate my L1, well, it's my loss. If I'm not going to be, I am at a position of disadvantage if I don't get to use my L1. So that's the mother tongue definition. So the first and second are fairly easy. Okay, so I mean the base level of definition of translanguaging is code switching. So students and teachers switch from L1 to L2 in the classroom, and in many progressive settings, okay, in progressive classrooms, code switching is considered acceptable, useful. It is to their advantage. People see it as a valuable means to understand difficult grammatical points, and sometimes it's even necessary when in conversation and listening speaking and listening activities, for translating unknown words and phrases. Okay, but it's much more than that for some people. It's not just about code switching. It's not just about activating my prior knowledge or using my prior knowledge. Okay? So this idea is not enough, because the reason we have to use our prior knowledge is it's not only because it is to our advantage. It is our right. The history of monolingual instruction is a way of perpetuating social and political iniquities. And the only way we can ensure the diversity of individuals in the classroom is to fight for the right to actually be there. So translanguaging as a social justice project. For some individuals, this activation is not just to learn the target language. It's actually to create something new. So for people like Ophelia Garcia and many others, it is a pedagogical practice, but it is a way for individuals to challenge the social hierarchies that are in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Excuse me. So in this particular definition, it's still learner-centered pedagogy, but the goal is not just learning the target language. So if you notice definition 1, we code switch so we better understand English. We use the mother tongue in Butzkamp's definition so we better understand whatever it is that we're learning in the classroom. But the third definition, the social justice project, Okay, it's not just about I have to learn the target language. It's a way for us to crack conventions, to challenge conventions. And in this definition, at least the third one, there is no target language. The target language is made by ideological conventions to make students conform. Okay, in a traditional classroom, students internalize rules, social linguistic rules, to make them conform to a social political body and to replicate the model language of the dominant class of their society. So we don't activate a prior knowledge, we don't activate a repertoire just so we can learn an external set of objectives that are not our own. For a lot of for the people who believe in translanguaging as a social justice project, this component of translanguaging is not just about learning something that is pre-given, something that is socially constructed. It's much more important that we actually come up with something new. So just to highlight that a little bit, this is Li Wei. She argues that translanguaging is not simply going between different linguistic structures and cognitive and semiotic systems and modalities, but going beyond them. Translanguaging is not just code switching between two languages, between L1 and L2. It's to find something new in going back and forth between my mother tongue and the language that I'm learning in the classroom. And why are we going beyond? Because the categories in our society are, to make it easy, they are not ours. The conventions that we learn in the classroom are conventions that are linked in deep social and political structures. They are reflections of it. And if we want to have something different, we need to go beyond the categories that are given in the classroom, because they are reflections of the structures that we have in our given political situation. So, just to make this a little bit clearer, perhaps we can think of this in a more concrete example. Translanguaging right now is a topic in English in one area, in second language acquisition, or at least in higher education. English as a medium of instruction. Many non-English universities are adopting English as a mode of instruction for reasons given that English is the lingua franca of our time. English, by teaching in English, a non-European, non-American university can attract more international students. There are reasons for that, but the students and teachers who participate in the system seem to have no choice as to why EMI is being used. Where does translanguaging help them? Translanguaging helps them insofar as they can go beyond the terms beyond these expectations and assumptions that they have to learn English. So again, to make it clear, for a lot of teachers who are teaching English, for a lot of students who are learning English, it seems that they are ideologically committed in just learning English without necessarily thinking as to the reasons why they have to learn it. And translanguaging at least offers them a way out, or a way to think of those reasons differently, and maybe come up with some new reasons or new modes of action so that they don't blindly just learn or teach the target language. The end of my talk, it was just the fourth definition. So just to kind of summarize before it becomes a little bit more obscure. Translanguaging is code switching. That's the first definition. We go from one language to the other. The second one is translanguaging is a way for me to activate my prior knowledge, use my mother tongue, because that is the best way for me to learn. And that kind of provides contextual support to the first definition. The social justice one is it's not about just the advantages of using my mother tongue. It is my right. It is a part of me. I need to use this mother tongue, and if I don't use it, I am just conforming to the mere conventions given to me. And if I want something new, if I want a different world, then I have to think differently as to why I should use something different, and not just learn from the inherited conventions of a given classroom. So the social project is a way to question educational praxis. And that is the goal of a translanguaging educator, is to activate that form of query in students. They don't have to merely follow the lesson. It is up to them to really come up with something new. And with that, to go beyond the boundaries. There is a term that Ophelia Garcia and others use when defining translanguaging, which is the deployment of one's repertoire. So it's the activation of one's repertoire. In Reperio, I would like to talk a little bit about what it means to activate our repertoire. And I forgot to talk about this, but I guess that we could talk a little bit more about scrambling social codes. So I guess that's where the freedom comes from. Classrooms encode a certain type of behavior, and translanguaging is a way to decode expectations and conventions that dominant society, that societies want individuals to behave. So a way to break away from conformity is to decode or scramble the code, at least in the classroom. So learning these codes is a mark of privilege. So that's enough of that. So decoding the modes of individuation, come up with something new. I would like to come up with this idea. And to kind of just conclude this talk. The goal of translanguaging, at least from a social justice perspective, is to come up with something new. And repertoire is from a Latin term, reperio, which is to bring forth. So the third definition, the social justice one, is that it sees conventions as leading to conformity. And these structures are not necessarily benevolent. They perpetuate inequities, inequalities. So a way to challenge convention is to come up with something new. So I guess this is the fourth definition that emerges from the third, the social justice one. and it's for translanguaging to bring something different. Now, I think that it's important that the social justice project is not without flaw, and I think that Ofelia Garcia and others perpetuate the very system of oppression that they're trying to fight against. This idea of translanguaging as a form of social justice project, it is still within the parameters of identity politics. So I think that if we are to bring something forth that is different from before, we have to leave the parameters of identity politics. And in the simplest terms, we are going in the dark. And it's not going to be easy, because for many people who are committed in a social justice project, the past is replete of examples of sexism and racism, violence and oppression. And that there is a motto, or at least a philosophy, that doesn't want to forget about those atrocities that happened in the past. And the social justice project that you find in education is a way of reminding ourselves of the atrocities of the past, historical atrocities. And these projects their objectives their objectives are rooted in this activist notion that these atrocities will come back, that they are still here if we don't do something about it. And I think that insofar as these social justice movements in education are rooted in this activist notion that atrocities might happen or are occurring, we cannot come up with anything new. So, to make it simple, I am hesitant as to what kind of novel. I am skeptical of any novel form emerging from a translanguaging classroom that is still within the parameters of identity politics. And that is the third definition. So what is the fourth definition? In the attempt to scramble the codes, the conventions of named languages, or the ways we understand ourselves as individuals, we need to perhaps reconsider those categories. And the point of translanguaging might not be human after all. For if the project is to liberate ourselves from the constraints and tyranny of our heritage, then the language we use must enable us to see ourselves in a different light, beyond the constraints of traditional categories. So, what does that mean? I have a quotation, which is where I would like to finally conclude this talk. If translanguaging is to bring forth something new, it might be something like this. And it's a quotation from Deleuze and Guattari, from a very difficult book, 1,000 Plateaus. And it's a quotation that I've thought a lot about. And in many ways, it is why I am drawn to the idea of translanguaging. And that is, if human beings do have a destiny, it is rather to escape the face, to dismantle the face and facializations, to become imperceptible, to become clandestine.
we might have to give up our identity. And that is in order for us to bring forth something new. And think of our identity being fixed in terms of the categories of race, gender, ethnicity, age. All of these categories must vanish. And perhaps even the titles of teacher, student, these go all away in order for us to come up with something new. That concludes my talk for today. If you guys happen to have any questions, please feel free to email me. So hopefully this has been somewhat useful. Again, what definition you would like to use. You can use translanguaging as code switching. Again, that is the most common one. There's a Woosong definition. There is also the social justice one. I am sympathetic to the social justice one, if you guys probably know. But let's really think about how we can go beyond the tradition and at least the modalities that we have inherited, so that we can come up with something new. Anyway, my name is Cyril Reyes, and thank you very much for watching.